sampling would be May, April, May, June of 2014, so we'll see.
This might come in handy. So, am I on here? Okay, hang on. I gotta start my my clock here. So, yeah, my name's Adam, and I work for the Department of Fish and Game, and I'm a hippie. And Scott Bauer, my boss, is a hippie. Jen's a hippie. I'm pretty sure that our director's a hippie for CDFW. And one of the things that he said when Jim mentioned that he came to talk to our region was that his directive as the director when he was hired by Jerry Brown was to stir things up. And I'm so happy that Jen and I get to work with all these great people that love to stir things up. So with that, this is Southern Humboldt, and I'm going to try to gloss over all this stuff a little bit because Jen did a great job covering it already. But clearly, there's a problem here. We've got 2,000 grows in Southern Humboldt alone. This is only half of the county, and with an estimated 4,000 that Jen told us. People just really love this plant, and just like alcohol, the prohibition thing doesn't seem like it's working very well. It's been cultivated in California for at least since the 60s with very few environmental impacts. There's that legal gray area that Jen sort of talked about. It creates a market for this thing without really having any threat of persecution, especially in the hills and the mountains where people can get away. So the anecdotal evidence is that CDFW's been devoting more and more of their time to this issue, and really we've got some staff working on it pretty much full time now because it's just that's just the workload. And this has increased rapidly over the last few years, and there's documented fish kills and water diversions, land conversions. So I'm not a hydrologist, but here's a hydrograph. And the interesting thing that we started noticing, some weird indicators. The blue line is the daily mean discharge. You can see that down here. The brown is the mean daily statistic over 60 years. So we started noticing that it was weird that in a wet year you have all this water, and then it actually dips below the low flow. The annual low flow, so we're wondering what are some causes for that. And there's a lot of causes for this, but it was just one of those things that kind of sent warning bells off. Another thing was there is a document that was created by the industry, the marijuana industry. This is a nonprofit, Humboldt Growers Association, and they're now Emerald Growers. They've joined with Mendocino. And basically they came up with this number that said plants can use about 6 gallons per plant per day. And there's some issues with that number, which I'll kind of get into and explain later in the assumptions. But it's kind of the best number that we have when considering growing a plant from a seed to an adult. So here's our problem is how do we quantify these environmental impacts in these poorly studied regions? So we started this little study that kind of snowballed and became a lot bigger, and it caught a lot of people's attention, and it's still kind of in the works. But what we did was we mapped marijuana cultivation sites in the 4 watersheds. You saw some of that. Estimated the plant water consumption, developed a water budget, and then we tried to measure growth over time in marijuana cultivation sites from 2009 to 2012. So really, one of the key issues in our marijuana mapping was it really was a battle of imagery versus analysis. And we had this really cool imagery from Google Earth, and we had also ArcGIS 10. And the cool thing about Google Earth is the imagery quality is amazing, as some of you may have seen. And it was in August, which is the peak of the growing season. The historical imagery tool on Google also allowed us to go back over time, and it had a measuring tool, but there's, of course, limited capabilities in Google Earth. So our ArcGIS, I'm sure a lot of you have figured out ways to get around this, but just for our department, we had really poor imagery quality, but it's so infinitely useful, as a lot of you know. And we were able to digitize areas and points. So this is kind of what it looks like for us when we're analyzing the data. These cells are kilometer squared grid cells, and you can see the watershed outline. And this is, of course, Redwood Creek in the south near Redway, California. And here's some great images from some of the Google Earth imagery. And let's just zoom in here on a cell. So this is a pretty typical site here. And what Jen and I do is when we find a site like this by systematically going through those cells, we can count these plants. And we have a lot of different criteria. We've spent a lot of time staring at Google Earth. And we go back and forth through a lot of the imagery and to sort of rule out these as being marijuana plants. Of course, greenhouses are really big. You can notice the tarps there again, most likely light depth. A pond right here, if you notice, kind of hard to see. And then there's, of course, some MJ up here. Now check this image out. It's horrible. It sucks. And so this is what we were dealing with in the NAPE imagery in ArcMap. So we had to go back and forth from these two images. You can still tell that there's plants here, and you can still see that there's greenhouses, but we had to really digitize in ArcMap. So here's what that looks like. We made point data, and then we counted all the plants in this area. We tried to get the areas as well as best as we could. Some problems, of course, with that. It's kind of subjective. Here's the greenhouses we marked. So Google Earth allowed us to use this cool measuring tool, and there was an article published in PLOS ONE just recently where they also used the same tool and they calibrated it using tennis courts. So we're calibrating our measurements from actual field data of greenhouses and how many plants there are in those greenhouses. So we measuring the increase in land area over time. These are really cool images. This is from 2010, and this is the new imagery. And you can see where they've graded the land there. They're kind of selecting these sites that already are, grassy, don't have a lot of tree cover. And here's that image that you already saw, and this is Salmon Creek. You can ignore all these numbers for now. So we just use graduated symbols here, and the bigger dots are the blue dots are the greenhouses, and the biggest dots are the largest greenhouses, and the red are the outdoor grows, with the biggest being the most number of plants. And then the yellow, they look kind of gross green in this picture, but the yellow dots are residences, which we also marked. This is Salmon Creek watershed. Kind of looks like Africa in a strange way. And we also did a stream layer in here to show you that a lot of these folks are pretty close to the proximity of the stream. There's not a lot in these areas over here. Here's our third watershed that we did. This was Redwood Creek in the north that has Redwood State Park. And of course, also some timberland, if you can see these clear cuts up here. Notice this north arrow. This is what it actually looks like. And we see a lot of interesting land use practices here because we've got a centralized area where that's private, of course, right in the middle there. This is Outlet Creek watershed, and somebody yesterday was asking about Willits Creek. Well, this is the town of Willits right here, and you can see all the residences in this area, and pretty different watersheds here that we're working with. This one is about half the size of Redwood Creek. Redwood Creek is about 10 times the size as our other two watersheds. So I began the throwing numbers and tables at you, part of my speech, and the big thing, the take-home here, is we got all these totals down here, and they were all right around 20,000 plants. We did calculated a plant per land area ratio, the highest in these two creeks. And we're kind of still working with these numbers to get the best that we can, because the greenhouses were measured. We're still waiting for those field measurements to come back so we can have a really accurate estimate of how many plants are in these greenhouses. So we teamed with a hydrologist at NIMS, and she helped us estimate the 7-day low flow for Redwood and Salmon Creek. Again, a lot of numbers, but just look at these averages here, and in particular, the Q-min is what we were interested in, just to get the worst case scenario, basically. So with the hydrology and some really easy calculations, we're kind of trying to set bookends, and these numbers probably could use a little more scrutiny, and I'd love some suggestions from everyone. But we're finding that it's right around, if you take the 6 gallons per plant per day estimate, and of course the hydrology in each of those two streams, we're still working on Redwood Creek North and Outlet. It's 30% in Redwood, 20% in Salmon Creek that could be taken for marijuana cultivation. We're also noticing these are really old graphs. Sorry that I don't have an updated graph for you, but over time, we can see that they're all increasing, and it's a huge issue, as Jim and Jen already pointed out. So take-home message here, it's just kind of another way Jen showed you that cool picture of greenhouses appearing on the landscape after 2006. This is displaying that same data. And it's interesting here to note, this is all our 4 watersheds. And the interesting thing to me is that the largest greenhouses, almost 90% of them appeared after 2006. So people are growing or getting more greenhouses. They're also going bigger. So some of our results and assumptions. So for our results, average number of cultivation site per watershed, 322. Average number of plants is around 20,000. This, of course, assumes that we can see and count all the marijuana cultivation sites and plants accurately. The average number of greenhouses was 304, but this assumes that all the greenhouses are in use and contain plants. So we're still working on a lot of these. Estimated volume of stream flow was between, and this is for the 2 watersheds, and this is compared to the 7-day low flows, was around 20 to 30%. This, of course, assumes that all the water is for cultivation and is surface water. This also assumes that the behavior of the growers is pumping during low flow periods, and that there's no difference between these 2 watersheds. It's the worst case scenario. So number and size of grows in all watersheds increased by at least 68% and up to 104% from 2009 to 2012. So here's our big statement. Preliminary results indicate that marijuana cultivation in the 4 study watersheds may have a significant negative effect on the watershed and the health of aquatic species. So some next steps. We're teaming with Jim, and he's being an amazing help in getting us that analytical data and the reference sites. And of course, we're going to seek funding and map additional watersheds. And we'll hire a full-time staff That's our dream anyway. We also, of course, want to continue outreach with local communities. And I just wanted to thank everyone that we've worked with, Scott. I also want to give a shout out to Jane Arnold and Mike Van Haddam in our office. And of course, Jim Harrington. He's been a great help during all this. And thanks a lot. I can take questions.
Yeah, I've got a question over here.
Okay.
I was wondering if you were soliciting funding from the medical marijuana users?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Are you soliciting funding from the legal medical marijuana users?
That's kind of an interesting question. That's the really difficult part of this issue is the regulation piece. Because if we do get regulation on this thing and it gets legalized, then how are we going to enforce that? Especially since the people that aren't going to get their regulation stuff taken care of anyway, because they haven't been doing so. Because a lot of the counties in Humboldt and Mendocino have started initiatives, but we can't really. It's hard to tax it because most people just aren't buying in. So that'd be a great thing if we could get that.
So what happens if it becomes legalized? All the farmers would come out of the shadows and then settle in the Central Valley region. But based on the water they used, this would become another issue in the Central Valley with water being diverted from regular agriculture. What are the plans to address that?
Yeah, that's of course a huge issue, and we don't really know what's going to happen. Legalization could be the thing that we hope for with legalization is the price comes down, so that there's not as much incentive to go as big. But people, you're very right. These are key issues, and if we do legalize it, we need to have a really solid framework for regulating it. So. That's a good and important question, and yeah, it's hard to answer that. Yeah.
I've seen information before on the overall impact and the outdoor cultivation, and understand for the greenhouses all the clearing and all the associated things. Have you guys seen? And I guess this is for all three of you. Releases like discharges from the greenhouses. Like, are you having fertilizer runoff? Are they directly discharging in water they aren't using? So, or is it mainly just clearing the area for those?
You ever been on a site visit?
Well, no, I haven't, but we know this, again, I'd rather leave alone the marijuana thing, like what we're going to do, legalize it if you like it or whatever. That's a different, we're scientists, we don't do that stuff. Yeah. But if we look at a regular greenhouse, we know that they, have intensive fertilizer and pesticides, and that has to go somewhere. So at this point, I think we'd assume it would be the same type of grow pattern and management as a regular greenhouse. So, but again, it's not regulated. We don't know. That's how come we're going to try to figure this out. Maybe they're the best stewards on earth because they're hippies. I don't know. We don't know.
Maybe just a question, maybe better for law enforcement, but you guys are here, you're from CDFW, and I guess what I wonder is, we have legal agriculture and a lot of regulations in place, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, and I guess, I may have some ideas, but maybe I'd like to hear from you guys why we can't use existing regulation to keep marijuana grows safe, clean, and from harming the streams.
I mean, yeah, we certainly, that's the hope, is we could, and that's the hardest thing is this issue is gigantic, and we don't have the staff to handle it or to really force regulation. So if people don't want to get their stuff regulated, then we can't really tax them or do anything for that. So.
Wait, don't. You're not there. You don't exist.
Okay.
Now you do.
So very recently, you may or may not have seen it in the paper, but there was an article about the governor being made aware of this issue, both legal and illegal effects of marijuana cultivation. And he directed the two agencies, the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the State Water Resources Control Board, to put together a team to start addressing this issue. And those teams have been formed and are essentially working on how to tackle this problem. So it is been identified as a priority for both agencies, and it is being actively worked on. The question is there money involved with that? These task force are made up of agency employees with levels of expertise on contaminants, water quality issues, et cetera. I don't know a whole lot of the details about it. I also don't know if there will be funding associated with this task force. That could be one of the results in that they recommend that additional studies be done along with trying to use, at least at this point, existing regulations to get these sites, at least the legal sites, into compliance, while also tackle the effect of the illegal marijuana cultivation. And obviously the feds have a role in this too. Not only, is it, it's not legalized by the federal government, but a lot of these, at least illegal grows, are grown on federal land. So they have a big role in this as well.
I have property on Uvis Creek, which is in Santa Clara County. I also have 2 riparian rights, which I pay $150 for each one. So I'm paying $300 a year. I can take out 13 acre-feet per year, and I have to record that every year to the board. And the thing about this is, if you want to get riparian rights to take water from the creek or from the river, whatever, there's a long process that you have to go through. So this is completely illegal. Of course, everything on this is illegal. So I just don't, they can't be taking it because they don't have a right. So it comes basically down, everything you're talking about is the laws that prevent it are not being enforced.
Right.
And all you're doing is putting one more patch on that tire. And that patch is getting higher and higher. A lot of the stuff that you're talking about, best management practices for these marijuana farms and this and that sort of thing, I'm in a farming community. I belong to the Loma Prieta Resource Conservation District. I'm one of the board of directors. There's all kinds of regulations that our farmers are having to go through the hoops.
Yep.
And so everything you're saying is insane because they're getting to all the practices. I don't know. It's just crazy.
What's that?
Why'd you do that?
I agree with you. It's this issue runs so deep. It's a deep-rooted, dark issue, and we're gonna have to rethink a lot of things. And I don't have the answers that, Jim said. I'm just a scientist, so I just try to collect the numbers.
I would add to that quick, sorry, it's not just a matter of trying to bring people into compliance. It's also a huge land use issue. So we're seeing all of these illegal subdivisions and land that's being converted to agriculture, and it's just, it's a huge issue, and we don't have an answer, but we hope there is one.
Yeah.
So, actually, this is a question for Jen. You mentioned there was a difference in rodenticide use between grows on private and public land? I actually don't know what that's about. Why is there that difference?
We're not entirely sure, but one theory, we just don't see the anticoagulant rodenticide use as much on the private land grows. And the theory about that is that people are there all year. So they're not, so what we see with the trespass grows, or what people like to call the cartel grows on public lands, we see people who are coming in, planting, and then, just dousing the site with these rodenticides to keep animals away and keep them from kind of chewing on the plants. And it's thought that on private lands, people are there, they can kind of manage their pests in different ways. So that's the only real theory that I have about it, but it's just not as prevalent on the private land grows.
On your presentation, Jen, you showed the signs where people were claiming that they were in compliance. And I'm just curious, when you come across those kind of scenarios where they do have their permit and they consider themselves to be legal, but you find water diversions, are you allowed to remove and eradicate the plants in those situations?
We don't usually eradicate plants. That usually happens when we go in with another agency. So we're concerned with the resource. So we're not concerned with the marijuana plants. We're concerned with the diversion. So we'll take things that are associated with the diversion. We'll take the pump, but we don't generally take the plants. Now, I can't really speak to what happens all of the time, but I know that that's what I've heard in general. And like I said, I don't go out on these sites. I'm more of an office person, so that's what I know.
I just wanted to comment on your question about current regulation. And one of the problems with it is just, as you guys mentioned, the sheer abundance of these grows. I think part of the reason why you're seeing these aspects that are currently illegal not being regulated, it's just simply because there's not enough time or personnel in law enforcement, as well as with you guys. It's they're having to pick and choose and go after the biggest grows that they find. So a lot of these get left alone. There's not enough. I've heard before that they're only able to, at least with the trespassing grows, they're only able to eradicate roughly 10% of the grows that they even know about, and locating those ones is another problem. But anyway, so that might be, I understand you're frustrated when, legal agriculture is being regulated so heavily, but these guys, it's very abundant, and they're smaller farms. It's hard to find them and regulate.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, anyone from our office would be right there with you, and we go out on, the environmental scientists from our office go out on maybe a dozen grows in a season. So it's just chipping away. It's not really doing any good. Anything to add to that? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I would agree to you. I mean, we can't, the issue is, when you look at a map like that, is where do you start, That's what we're trying to do, really, is trying to figure out through bioassessment and other means where we can target these really hot spots,
Given the amount of fish kills and the times that they occur, which species would be the most impacted of the three salmonids we have in California?
Depends on where you are.
Yeah, it depends on the stream. The two fish kills that are documented at least that I know about this year are both coho, because they're the big ones, the endangered. So.
Yeah, we should probably wrap it up. Like I say, it's an emotional thing. We don't know. I heard once that they don't want to regulate it because then that would be acknowledging the marijuana as an industry, and they don't want to do that. So there's a lot of politics involved. I just want to make sure that, again, the question, is marijuana the worst water quality problem? I just want to keep in perspective with just think if you were a illegal or a bad timber operator, let's say, and someone comes to you and you say, no, it's not me, it's the hippies up there, go get them. I mean, it's like, be so easy to blame it on other things. So I just kind of want to get to that question and document that it's really bad. And who knows where that'll go from there. Perhaps funding will come from it if it is really documented. Oh, and in fact, Trish was saying, oh yeah, someone found DDT. It was Andy Gordis. and he didn't have it analyzed, because I knew it wasn't analyzed, because he had to send it to our lab. He's just suspecting it through inference that they're using DDT on these grows. There's so much speculation out there. It'd just be nice to try to systematically document it and then go from there. But other than that, we don't know how the whole deal's going to work. It is exploding. And you better these guys got to stick around. They need permanent jobs so that they stay here. We don't want to lose the resource. So we need money, people. We need to get this thing going. And thank you very much. And I really, really need to thank the speakers. I know they're not all here. They have lives. They have to go. I appreciate them coming. We had great presentations. I appreciate you all sticking with us. And I know we went over, but hopefully you think it's worth it. Next, for those who are interested, we're going to have a short organizational meeting for the new chapter of SFS, be it California or Pacific Southwest, one of the things. So whoever wants to stay, please stay. Other than that, thank you for coming, and we'll see you next. Oh, and the evaluations, it's like part of the ritual of getting this. Again, I really appreciate all the sponsors and the Training Academy for paying for this. So tell them that you love it and you want it every year. Thanks.